I know. Right. Thank you. Mr. Clerk, good evening. Today is November 20. This is a Subcommittee on Public Safety hearing. If I could ask Mr. Clerk, please call the roll, please.
Chairman Noon.
Here.
Counsel Leahy. Here. Counsel Milonazo.
Here.
Three present.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. We want to thank Judge First Justice of Middlesex, Judge J. Blissman, Juvenile Court, and D.A. Ryan for being here. This is a discussion around the issues of restorative justice program that was actually started in the court by Judge J. Blissman and some partner like D.A. Ryan. So also I want to acknowledge as well with us tonight is Councilor Rita Mercier and Councilor Conway and two assistant ADA, Alisa and Ariana. Thank you for coming. If my fellow committee member don't mind, I'm going to turn this to this discussion to Judge J. Blissman to have him give an overview of the restorative justice program in the court. Judge.
No, press the button.
Press the button, Judge.
Perfect.
Yes, sir.
Oh, well,
Perfect. Thank
Now
you.
your answer.
forgive me, we don't have high tech in the, in the Lowell Juvenile Court. Thank you very much for this opportunity to talk to you about the restorative justice program that we began in the Lowell Juvenile Court. So some context, some background. About 10 years ago now, a little bit more than that actually, we started having school court meetings in Lowell in which we invited all systemic players, obviously the district attorney, public defender, court professionals, probation. The idea was to explore ways of exploring alternatives to what are necessarily polarizing court cases, looking for ways to collaborate and hopefully divert cases. Through that process, one of the ideas that was suggested to us was to explore restorative justice. Now, restorative justice was something that I was not really that familiar with or comfortable with, but I guess you can teach old dogs new tricks. So I and Marion and other people, we actually participated in restorative justice training at Northeastern Law School. We started with the assistance of a technical assistance grant from the Trial Court of Massachusetts. We launched a restorative justice diversion program. It was originally called the Juvenile Court Restorative Justice Diversion Program. It's now been reincarnated as our RJ because as I'll tell you momentarily, we've sort of evolved from a more court-based model to a more school-based model, which quite candidly was initially what I and some of my colleagues had envisioned. Given the belief that we think restorative justice has its greatest power in the community, specifically in schools. So why schools? Well, the research is pretty compelling that youth who don't graduate high school are 8 times more likely to be arrested later. Not necessarily immediately, but soon thereafter. So, for example, if you spoke to Greg Courteau from UTEC and his team and you educate yourself about reentry, you'll find out that most of the people in Billerica, very few people have gone past the 10th grade. It's certainly true of the DYS population as well. So we're talking about the same population. And we now know overwhelmingly that it's a lot cheaper to educate than it is to incarcerate. So upstream intervention in order to keep kids in school, better protect public safety seemed to be a way to a worthwhile thing of exploring. So the way restorative justice works is there are different models. So, for example, I know the DA's office, they've worked with us. They've also worked with committees for restorative justice, and I know Marion will be talking about that program as well. They're different models, but what they have in common is accountability, where a person takes responsibility for the harm he or she has caused. You heal the harm within that community. What's really exciting, I think, for an adolescent is you sort of change the paradigm. You go from being labeled as the problem to a problem solver. And in so doing so, you become part of the community where you're repairing the harm. Obviously, there's a tremendous incentive for a young person to participate because you could avoid arraignment. This was also before we had diversion in the new Criminal Justice Reform Act. So where diversion was sort of, once you were arraigned, you're in the system, and with all the collateral consequences that entails. So due process concerns are addressed by a memorandum of understanding, so that if what happens with the restorative justice program is that if you don't complete if you don't repair the harm, if you don't fulfill the reparation agreement, say for example you've tagged a locker in school, if you don't remove the tag, if you haven't appropriately addressed what you've done to that community, then the case goes the traditional court route. But statements that you make during the restorative process can't later be used to prosecute you. So that's the incentive to participate, and that's the due process protection. So now, Marion was kind enough to remind me, we have a Restorative Justice Act. This has been years in the making. People like Marion have been very active in working with a variety of partners to try to get this legislation enacted. So restorative justice can now be used at any point in the criminal process for specified offenses. So that's really, really exciting. So as regards the program, the evolution of the program that I was talking about, according to the data that I've compiled, since we formally launched the program in 2012, 79 cases were diverted working with the District Attorney's diversion program. We have currently 2 cases that are still open on diversion, and we also are handling some, good evening. We also have some status offense cases that we are handling in the Cambridge court. Status offenses are non-criminal matters. These are the stubborn child, school offender cases. Now, indicated that as we evolve from the restorative justice diversion program into our RJ, our restorative justice, we become more intentional about working with the schools. So the program secured a grant with the support of the Office of the Commissioner of Probation, working with the Lowell School Department to pilot restorative justice in the schools. So currently, we have a coaching support being provided 8 hours a week at the Butler School for whole-scale restorative justice implementation. And it's my hope, my lips to Interim Deputy Superintendent Janine Durkin's ears, that this would be expanded to other schools within the Lowell schools. And the reason I was talking to Councilor Milizano about this moments before the meeting began, what commends this model is that it's very, very affordable, because you're talking about having a trainer come in to train the teachers then to do the restorative work. So you're not talking about something which costs money. You're talking about the teachers then using this as a form of discipline, a form of accountability. You're also talking about peer training. So for example, we hope to work with Yvette Thomas, who is the mediation specialist at the Lowell High School, to sort of develop this, if we can, in the high school as well. We're also working with Terry Downs, former clerk in the Lowell District Court, as you may know, who now does mediation work with the Lowell School Department. So for the reasons I've outlined, we've decided that given our current capacity, we're going to try to focus more on the community and working with community partners, such as the school system, such as UTEC, where we also have a very robust relationship. So that's the overview. I could bore you to death and tell you how RJ works, but I don't know if you want to get that may be too much in the weeds for this conversation.
Thank you, Judge. Also want to recognize Madam City Managers, Eileen Dunn, who's here with us. DA Ryan, would you like to add to that, what Judge is?
Madam Manager, Councilor, thank you for having us tonight. I remember well the day that Judge Blitzman and I went off to Northeastern. It was a Saturday. It was about 10 below zero. It was snowing, and the training lasted about 100 hours. I could not possibly have been less interested in going to a restorative justice training program because of all of the things that we have on our plate, the whole idea that we were suddenly going to literally be passing a speaking rock around the circle, and that was how we were going to resolve cases, was not something I was interested in.
Now you're getting into the weeds. So,
Right.
so the restored, it's a talking piece that when a person has that piece, nobody else could interrupt. And we're looking at each other because Marianne used to be a DA in trying cases, and I was a public defender. We would try cases against each other. And, as I've said in other contexts, if you had told us in the early 80s when we were fighting in court that we'd be sharing a talking piece, we would have said, I don't think so.
And the talking piece is a rock, I'm not kidding. So, but as Judge Blitzman mentioned it, I have become probably the most outspoken supporter of restorative justice. For the last 5 years, we have used it extensively across Middlesex County. I have been a lone voice in that we have been the only county. And I have spent the last 4 years working closely with a number of folks in the legislature, including Senator Eldridge and Senator Brownsberger, to get that included in the criminal justice reform bill. So that now, as of August 13th, everyone is afforded that opportunity. And I support it really for 3 reasons. The first is that victims who go through the process and use restorative justice, and it is entirely voluntary on everybody's part. Victims don't have to participate, defendants obviously can't be made to participate, have a much higher satisfaction in terms of what they take away from the process. And I'll give you probably the simplest example. Your house is broken into. We catch the individual who broke into your house, he's brought before the court. In the normal course, we would have a trial or there'd be an admission, we get to sentencing, off he goes. The question you really need answered, and I mean need answered, as to whether or not you're going to be comfortable remaining in your home is, was this random or was I targeted? And where is my grandmother's wedding ring that he stole when he came in the house? We don't really have a way to get that done in the normal process. In restorative justice, when there is that exchange and when the offender has to listen to the harm that's been caused, when a victim gets to ask those questions, and most often get answers to that question, they leave with a very different sense of how the criminal justice process works, much more satisfied with what's happened. The second reason I am so supportive of it is, one of the things that we have really worked very hard over the last 5 years to change is, it is very simple to have the same people show up over and over again. Anyone who has spent time in the Lowell District Court or in the juvenile court, and certainly having been a prosecutor for a long time, I've had the misfortune of prosecuting the children and grandchildren of people that I prosecuted early in my career. That is not a success. And the idea is to change the trajectory of someone's life and cause them to behave in a different way. The process of bringing people in with a very regulated set of conditions we're going to put on. First, you're going to get a quaff, a continue without a finding. Maybe then you'll work your way to probation. Maybe then you'll work your way to a guilty. Maybe we'll assign some fines or payment of restitution. Very often, your parents will come with a checkbook and they will write a check, and that will pay it. And you leave with a bigger chip on your shoulder than you came in with. Not surprising that we see people come back. Having to go through this process and engage in actually, if you think about it just in terms of your personal life, you wrong someone, the person comes, yells at you, tells you all of the things you've done, and then stomps away. You might feel badly for 5 minutes, but in all likelihood, by minute 7, you're already figuring out why it's not really as much your fault and how dare they yell at you, and the spiral just continues. When you have to actually engage in a conversation, and it's a mediated conversation, and you have to listen and not interrupt, and hear the impact that your behavior has had on someone else, and then account for yourself, that's when things change. And that really is the most important reason why I support restorative justice, because in all the years that I've stood in a courtroom, if you think about every television show or movie that you see about a courtroom, the prosecutor talks, the defense attorney talks, the judge imposes some sentencing, maybe probation or someone else speaks. But all of that is talking at the offender. That doesn't lead us to transformation, and that should be the goal. When you sit in a circle and you hear someone really hear what the impact has been and account for that, that does result in transformation. And I think probably the best example of that was a circle where the offense was actually against a police officer who was willing to participate in that circle. The call was one that was pretty simple, a 911 call during the winter that there were a group of kids on an overpass throwing chunks of ice and snow onto the cars below. Incredible public safety risk. Police officer responds, he's by himself. As he pulls up, he sees the group of young men, they're throwing blocks of ice and snow off the overpass. He slows down, and they did what everybody does, they scattered. He has the opportunity to particularly see the face of one of the individuals who's running and realizes that's a kid who's about his own kid's age. He's now chasing that young man. The others have gotten ahead. The young man runs into the side of the road. There's snow and ice underfoot. It's very dark. The officer's alone. He's chasing this young man, yelling for him to stop. He's not stopping. They're slipping and sliding through the brush. And at some point, the young man turns around, reaches into his pants, and the officer sees a shiny object in his hand. We all know hundreds of those cases that have ended in terrible tragedy. And in this case, tragedy was averted because 2 other officers arrived at that moment, and they were able to place the young man under arrest. In his hand was a cell phone, a stainless steel reflective cell phone. In that circle, when the officer talked about the fact that I had seen the face of that young man, I knew he was only the age of my own son. I didn't want to be in a position of using my weapon, but I also wanted to go home. I was alone. He had a stainless steel object glinting in his hand in the moonlight that was coming through there. There was a difference. There was a change for that young man, who then went on through tears to say that he did, when the officer arrived, what kids do, he ran. That as they were running, the officer was big. He was wearing his heavy jacket, his belt, all of that. The young man, thought that he looked ridiculous. The officer looked ridiculous, stumbling through the snow, carrying things, yelling. And he took out the phone because he was going to take a photo to show his friends. And he explained he obviously never thought about what the officer would think, seeing him reach into the waistband of his pants and come out with a metallic object. Every time I think about that circle and you think how close you are to tragedy, that story being told and having to account for that, and both of them ending in tears, it's hard for me to believe that we're going to see that young person again in the same setting. And that is what we see. The recidivism rates, and we're only about 1.25 years out from people who finished their contracts to make reparation, is so much lower than what we see in a traditional disposition. So in terms of public safety, short-term and long-term, better satisfaction for victims in the process, and then obviously not seeing folks return. There is no better, less expensive alternative than restorative justice. So for those reasons, I have been a very strong supporter. I am delighted that it's going to be expanded across the Commonwealth. It has become something that we use, as Judge Blitzman said, in a number of situations in schools. You may remember just at the end of school this year, a very public incident took place at Arlington High School. A group of young people, it was supposed to be a senior prank, as these things sometimes do. They were going to shrink wrap some doors in the school. Things went awry. There were a lot of terrible, terrible racist, homophobic, ethnic slurs that were written through the school. That's the kind of case that would everyone involved, a senior with a nice letter to some college. Probably that case would have resolved itself with people writing checks and not much recognition. The community asked that there be restorative justice, and that all of the groups that were impacted by the kind of slurs that were written there be allowed to sit there. So the people had to hear what it means when I lost my grandparents in the Holocaust, and now you thought it was funny to draw a swastika. What it means that I finally felt brave enough to come out to some of my friends about my sexuality, and now you're writing those kind of things on the wall. Again, such a better result, and so much more effective than the kinds of things, suspensions and all kinds of things that we do in school that really just put kids back out on the street for more of the time.
Or in the court context, when we give community service, which is meaningless.
Right.
Robotic community service, such as sweep the courthouse steps. We're talking about a reparation agreement in this context, and it comes from the Truth and Reconciliation model, where you actually repair the harm. So the restorative work you're doing is to make the victim whole in a different kind of way. We're talking about maybe and again, the victim has to be, we change the phrases. We use responsible party, harm party, because we're changing the paradigm from the criminal to a more restorative model. But of course, the harm party has to be willing to engage, because you can't impose this upon a harm party. But it might be repairing his or her property. It might be making, amends to his or her church. It's got to be meaningful in a way where the reparation work is much more consequential than is the current norm. And also, not only is it a better alternative than traditional court processing in many ways, it's more affordable, it's much quicker,
Much quicker.
and it's much more immediate. And, Miriam, you made a very, very insightful remark. If you go to juvenile court, you'll see young people stand there without speaking, and they're walking out of court with 5 or 6 conditions of probation. They're nodding their head. They're getting assigned these meaningless tasks. They're going to be violated on probation within a few months. They don't know it, but I know it. When you see somebody actually engage in a circle, they're talking in a way that they're being given voice in a way which makes them much more responsible and much more engaged. So in terms of positive youth development, it's also a much more I think, socially appropriate model than a lot of traditional court processing. I'm not saying that restorative justice should replace court process, but it certainly could be used in a very robust complementary fashion.
The other piece of it is that restorative justice is hard. It's hard to be in that circle. It's hard to take that punishment, which might, frankly, be more onerous than the continue without a finding and the $100 fine that you would get if you went through the process. So there are people who choose not to do that, but the people who are there, especially when sometimes they are also suggesting conditions of reparation. I could do this, or what if I did that? Obviously, it's much easier to swallow that than, as the judge said, when we're just saying, do drug screens, do whatever. They're clearly never going to follow all those
They just
conditions.
nod their head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They'll walk out, and that has no impact whatsoever.
Right. I want to acknowledge the president of Karen Cirola, Councilor Cirola, and also the assistant city managers, Karen, Carrot, Keith. Any question for the judge?
If I could, through you, Mr. Chairman, it's remarkable since 2012, the progress that has been made in the restorative justice program. And that you mentioned that there's actually legislation that's been passed now as a result of the program. When do you bring family members in? And at what age do you really feel that someone who's before you and in the circle, that they really understand what being remorseful really means?
Well, it's a really, it's an important question. One of the reasons why I think it's important to do it in the school context is that anybody who's worked with young people, for example, in the school context, always talks about the importance of the difficulty of family engagement. So when you talk about who's at the restorative justice table, the responsible party is encouraged and instructed and told to bring in family members. They become part of the conversation.
Including siblings, including brothers, sisters?
Well, a person that's self-identified, anybody,
Okay.
exactly, anybody whom they think is going to be supportive of him or her. The same way that the harm party brings in their their community. So it's a very, very fact-driven, fact-specific endeavor. You have somebody who's coordinating it in terms of who the communities are, but you have a much better conversation. And I'll tell you, this notion of the talking piece, which I thought was just really, you know, if you had told me 20 years ago, 10 years ago, that I'd be sitting here this evening talking about what a great idea this was, I would have said, oh, no way. I'm not going to be, you know. But it really makes you listen to everybody else, because nobody, as Marion said, nobody can interrupt while you got that talking piece. So it really encourages reflective listening. And you build community in the process. I mean, just from the exercise, I remember when we went to Northeastern. Everybody feels much, you know, it sounds hokey, I know.
Yeah.
But you feel so much more connected because you're really listening in a way that we don't really do. We don't take the time to do that in the court session. In the court session, I've got 30 cases. I'm not going to be able to do that in every case. So this is done out of court with somebody who's trained. And the idea, the reason why I love the school model is teachers can be trained to do this. Students could be trained to do this. You know, it's a culture. Once you think that this has utility, there's some schools that use it now. They just use it not only for discipline, by the way, but just for engagement. You know, Harry Spence, who used to be the court manager, when he was in charge of then DSS, he ran his management meetings in that fashion. Just a way to have people, you know, weigh in and be part of the process.
To your question, Counselor, obviously in the court now, we're not going to be seeing children that are under the age of 12, who certainly are old enough to participate. But as Judge Blitzman mentioned, my children went to a Montessori school beginning at 3, and they used the talking piece, and that was how they had conversation when someone misbehaved. So with trained facilitators and obviously appropriate language and all of that, you can use this for very young children. So certainly the people that are involved with us are going to be able to understand.
Just a quick example. I was at the Bridge Alternative School today for their multicultural feast that they do. So they begin their day sometimes with a circle check-in. I don't know if you're familiar with adverse child experiences. This is now sort of one of the things that a lot of educators are using. Adverse child experiences, you look at the traumatic events that a child has experienced, and you know a little bit about your school community. You have kids check in. You sort of take the pulse right from the beginning of the day. So it helps the teacher know what kind of mood, you know, the student's in. You know, you say, well, how do you feeling on a scale of 0 to 10? You don't have to get fact specific, but the teacher who knows the students already is thinking in these categories. Okay, they know. All right, they have some sense about, you know, what's going to trigger a kid that on a particular day.
Councilor Ferrello?
Yes, hi. I think that this is wonderful because when people talk, you end up finding common ground, and then there's that level of empathy, and so this is just absolutely wonderful because I find that the person who did the harm and the person who was harmed in whatever fashion, through their conversation, they might say something like, well, I had that happen to me. And then it really starts the understanding and the empathy process.
Yeah, well,
and coming
actually,
together.
You know, one of the most powerful spokespersons for restorative justice is Janet Connors. She was involved in our training. Mm-hmm. Her son Joel was murdered. And you know, the way the court process went, I think there were 3 co-defendants. 1 defendant got acquitted, 2 pled out. She ultimately ended up engaging in a conversation with the 2 people who took responsibility. She's become an amazing advocate. She's featured in a movie now on restorative justice that's out called Circle Up. It's a documentary that was done by Julie Maliozzi, a local documentarian.
Councilor Conway?
Very nice. Thank you so much.
Council, just to that point, one of the most effective ways we've been using this, I was out in Maynard yesterday, is in schools to use to resolve bullying situations, particularly cyberbullying. You know, because
Right.
obviously when you cyberbully, you think you're sort of talking on this anonymous screen. It's very different than sitting across from the person you've said those
Right.
terrible things about. So it's very effective for that.
Yes, thank you.
Councillor Conway.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I congratulate you on this program, because I think it is obviously something that's needed, it's effective. I've been fortunate enough to be, in my working days, in education for almost 40 years, as a teacher and a housemaster and a principal. And I will tell you that most of the time was spent over at Lowell High. And as a housemaster, which I'm sure you people are familiar with, you spend a lot of your time dealing with discipline problems. And you also find that you're spending so much time on so few. It's that theory of 10% doing 90% of the problems. And I think that when you have, what type of discipline do you have? You have detentions and suspensions and bringing the parents in. There's a frustration level that takes place with not just the teacher or the staff member in the school and the student, but also with the parents. They're all looking for guidance. And it's a very difficult thing. And I think that once you see that what you have done and how it affects an individual is so important. And I will tell you that what's important too in these schools, when we have our resource officers, and they haven't been, you know, they've been in the schools for a number of years right now, and I will tell you that, you know, they're a very, very important part of what goes on in a school. So again, I think that we certainly need a new direction, and I think the school is obviously one of the best places. And you mentioned cyberbullying. That was, when I was leaving, that was coming in, and it became very, very complicated. We'd meet numerous times with staff members and with police trying to figure out, how do we solve this problem? And it is very difficult and very complicated, and they don't realize what they actually do to children. And as we have seen too often, that some of these children end up committing suicide. And I think that whatever we can do at this level, especially the school level, it can make, I think that's where we have to concentrate all our efforts and energy to make this work. So again, we thank you very much, and I'm sure the schools will be very happy to work with this program.
Judge, the program, the court-based model, when was it start?
Well, the court-based model was started in 2012 or so.
And it did evolve.
2013. And as I said, we handled 79 cases, 2 still, I think, open.
I see.
Now we're trying to focus on the schools. So I know that Janine Durkin observed some of these sessions at the Butler. Hopefully we got good reports, or not me, because I'm not, you know. Hopefully the facilitator got good reports. I think the Officer of Commissioner Probation is very on board with it. You know, if you look nationally, if you look at court reform, trying to move more cases, sort of the low-hanging fruit cases from the court system, so the court system could focus on the high-risk need kids and high-risk defendants. There's a lot of support for this nationally.
Right.
So restorative justice seems to be, I think its time has come. And I think we're talking about this legislation that was enacted. This bill has been pending for how long?
4 years.
4 years. And debates and internal debates amongst advocates about confidentiality agreements. But in terms of getting actual traction in the legislature, I think it reflects in part what's going on across the country.
So when it's evolved to the school basis that you mentioned, Butler School, what's the cost to the city or to the school of that program?
Well, the cost is minimum. The cost, I mean, this is being done now with a $3,000 grant. Right now, we have John Barry he's working with RJ and Center for Restorative Justice, and he's training the trainers. I think it was last year, or the year before, I think a group, and I think Deputy Superintendent or interim director, I apologize, Durkin could give you the information. I think a team of Lowell school teachers went to a national conference in New York, and they came back. You know, people like, you know, Mayor Ryan and I are talking to them about restorative justice, but when you see it yourself, it's the same thing for me. When I first heard about restorative justice, I said, no, that's not, you know, I don't like that. I used to represent kids. That's not due process. The group is going to tell me what's good for my kid. Then I experienced it myself and saw young people in the process actually being given more voice than we give them in the court system. Of course, now I'm a judge. My role is, you know, is a little bit different. But similarly, I said, you know, you can teach old dogs new tricks. But initially, I was very, very resistant. I was on a restorative justice panel at Northeastern, and one of the other speakers said to me, "What are you doing on this panel?" I was invited because of the school court meetings we were running. I guess they felt that was somewhat restorative. This was Carolyn Boyce Watson. She reminded me, you came to my class at Suffolk 10 years ago, and you spoke against restorative justice. Well, I guess, you know, times change. So you talk to teachers about, you know, how they should discipline, and people start throwing out phrases like strength-based discipline. I'm an educator. You're in, you know, who am I to tell you, you know, how to do your job? So the educators say, well, I know what I'm doing. But then again, when you have educators experience a different way, the same way for me as a court professional, I experience a different way, it gets exciting. It gets exciting. So my understanding from this trip was that a number of the people who went on the trip, they sort of got real excited about restorative justice on their own, and they came back and started talking about restorative justice, you know, so that was a good feeling. So I think as we, you know, as we seed it, as we try it, I think it's got a lot of potential.
Dear Ryan, at what stage does your assistant ADA involve in the court-based model? Do they involve at all?
So very often it begins even before the cases come in. We often know about a case that's coming. So that's a case that we would take out of line to be arraigned. If it's going to be a pre-arraignment involvement with restorative justice. Sometimes the case has already been arraigned and there's a referral. We have a young adult bureau, diversion bureau, that refers those cases, makes the arrangements, sets up the circles. We'll meet with the victims, we'll meet with the police departments, we'll be at the circles, we'll oversee the writing of the contract and then the enforcement of the contract. I take very seriously the fact that if we tell people that they've engaged in this process and there's a contract and things are going to be done, that we be on top of that and be being certain that those things are being done, or the case goes back on track. So we're very much involved in that follow-up process and seeing that what's supposed to happen happens. Hopefully we get to a good resolution and everyone is done. If not, there's a decision made whether to give the young person another chance in terms of fulfilling those conditions, or they're out of chances, and it's time to put the case back on track.
Want to also acknowledge our Chief Richardson is with us. Dear Ryan, if you don't mind, could I ask from their experience in terms of dealing with some of these cases, you assistant ADA, either Mina and or Balazaro, want to give input as to what's your experience like involved in this circle, in this kind of work? Any one of you? Press the button. Yeah.
So I actually just recently transferred from Malden District Court to Lowell, and I am new in the juvenile system. I'm still learning, but before I came to Lowell, I was the point person for diversion in Malden. So in Malden, the way it works, and in our office, the way it works is that we see a potential candidate for diversion. We make the referral to the diversion team, and they decide whether they're accepted or not. And I have to say, the people that I have referred, I don't often see them coming back on the trial track. I think that we've had good outcomes with them, and I know that, you know, once they agree to trying to get into our diversion program, I've had conversations with potential defendants that never really become defendants because they are diverted. And oftentimes, I've never had someone decline to go into diversion after a conversation that I've had with them. it just seems that people are more willing to, that is something I explain if I'm thinking of these two kids in particular, like going over to them and asking them if they would be amenable to diversion and telling them that I would like to save their criminal record, and they're all ears about that because, kids do stupid things. And I told that couple of kids that, this does involve taking responsibility for it, and if you can complete it, the case is ultimately never arraigned. And I've found that having that conversation with not just them, but like that conversation with a lot of potential defendants, they are very amenable to it, and I rarely see instances where their cases get back on the trial track.
So in order, DA Ryan, in order for them to get into the program, they need to accept responsibility, listen to the victim, and then make an active or concrete step to make those changes is that correct?
Yes. I mean, someone who says, I'm not the person who was arrested, I'm not the person who committed this act or something like that. Obviously that's a case that needs to go to trial because they can't be in the circle taking responsibility and making reparation if they didn't do it.
There's a difference between mediation
Right.
and restorative justice. Mediation is just as you have two sides and you're trying to get to yes, to paraphrase, was it Professor Fisher, the book? But in RJ, you're taking responsibility. And again, so you take responsibility and then you work on the reparation, you work on the repairing harm. If you don't fulfill the reparation agreement, then the case is going to go the traditional route. With the caveat, as I said earlier, that the statements that you make during that process can't be used against you to prosecute you. But so that's the due process protection in terms of a memorandum of understanding. So that's important to some defendants. So now you have the defense bar with the enactment of the statute are encouraging clients to participate in appropriate circumstances.
Just quickly, as an aside, we have a new district attorney in Suffolk County. Have you spoken to her yet relative to her support of this program? Because, it serves both Boston and Lowell, and I think she ran on a platform of decriminalizing some of the cases that may not actually now get to this, but I'm just wondering what her position is on this program.
I've spoken extensively to her about that. In fact, she had an opportunity to come and be with me at a program we did Thursday night in Concord with C4RJ, the Restorative Justice Program. Obviously, I think it's a question of seeing it and learning it. She is certainly supportive of that concept. And then how that's going to work in Suffolk is a different place than Middlesex. But I think they will have to find their way of putting that in practice over there.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
I'm good. This was very informative. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the
Thank
opportunity.
you for having us.
One, maybe also to DA Ryan, so would you recommend the council through the school, to the school committee to explore a possibility of expanding this program, not just in Butler, but also in other schools? Sounds like from what you're saying that the cost is minimal, and if you do train the trainer, the teachers and or the peer, it wouldn't cost us money, but the program then start as a preventative approach. Is that correct?
For the reasons that I've been discussing, and I think Marion would agree, I think the answer would be, my response would be a very robust, resounding yes.
Yes, I agree.
Thank you. Well, that said, I was wondering if my fellow subcommittee member want to make a motion recommended that the mayor speak to the school committee and or school department to explore a possibility of expand this program from Butler School to other schools.
Mm-hmm. I would move that, Mr. Chairman.
Sure, second.
Mr. Clerk, please call the roll. Yes.
Counselor Leahy.
Yes.
Counselor Milonazo.
Yes.
3 yeas.
Want to thank Judge Jay Blissman, DA Ryan. Congratulations to your big victory of a re-election. And thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you very much.
Happy
Thank you so
Thanksgiving.
much. Have a nice holiday. Thank you. Congratulations on your position.
Hey there. All right, good. I do? No, I don't, but I'll take them.